Hi there. I'm with Danielle Faulkner from PwC, and we're talking about family enterprises or family businesses as they grow in size and complexity and have shared family assets. So, Danielle, let's talk about maybe a framework that needs to be developed as families grow in size and complexity around their assets. First off, who is this for?
So this framework really is for any enterprising family or high net worth individual, no matter where they are in their life cycle. I will say that there's definitely an advantage to starting early because as the family grows and becomes more complex, it does become a bigger challenge to really get your arms around everything. So starting early, putting that foundation in place, aligning it to really the vision and the purpose of the family legacy is really critical. So starting with the founder is really the best case scenario, but you can really adapt it at any point of your life cycle.
Yeah, you started a little bit in on the why for this, but what happens if they don't implement something? What kind of, I'm going to editorialize a little bit here. What kind of chaos could ensue?
Exactly. So we often see families making decisions based on incomplete, inaccurate, or untimely data. They have a lot of information in their head and they're trying to manage the complexity of the family wealth without having a simple framework to follow. And so, really, the guide of this framework is to keep it simple, give a checklist of how to approach this, and really reinforce the guiding principles that are so important for success. So, I think staying aligned on the vision and purpose and right sizing this for your purpose and goals is very important.
So let's talk about the framework itself. What are some of the key elements?
So I want to say we developed this framework in conjunction with Egon Zehnder as well as Northwestern John L. Ward Center. It was a collaborative effort. And as we sat down, we compared notes about what we've been seeing in the industry. And this seems to be a common struggle for families. And so we pulled together a comprehensive framework and tried to keep it as simple as possible. So we used the analogy of a tree. And if you just think of a fruit bearing tree and you know how you start out as a sapling and you've got those roots that are the foundation of it all. And so that's the growth engine for the family. And so that bucket of assets as well as uses of cash is, early stage generating the growth. It's the operating company. It could also be, a liquidity event where you have another portfolio of assets to invest. But this is really the aspirational growth of the family legacy. And then the next stage of the framework is the stability and preservation. This is the trunk of the tree. So this is as the tree is growing, it's becoming stronger, and you want to make sure you're focusing on, proper risk management. So how do we build appropriate reserves? How do we manage the risk of our portfolio? Maybe it involves diversifying beyond the operating company. And it also involves minimum level of spending. So maybe your minimum level of philanthropy, you're just getting started, and your lifestyle maintenance spending. So lining up those assets with the uses of the cash generated from those assets in that second bucket is really critical for middle stage enterprises and beyond. And then the final stage is really the fruits of your labor. So think of this blossoming tree that is now producing fruit for more discretionary spending. So this is your spending and giving. Maybe you're launching a foundation and you're enhancing your lifestyle. And so what are the assets and the uses that are going to match up that activity?
It's a simple framework, but there's a lot of activity going on in there. You probably have both governance and operating principles, or governance structures and governance principles, as well as operating structures and operating principles. What does that look like?
Yeah, that really gets to the how. So we've established the baseline of the framework. And when you think about how do I get started, you need to think about this as a bottoms up approach. So you're going to first take an inventory of what you have. And that inventory is going to look different for every family, depending on where you are in the life cycle. And so you think of an early sapling and then growing into this prospering tree. If you start with these principles and this discipline early, there will be less pruning that is going to be required in the future. So it's never too early to start, but you need to have that champion, that sponsor in the family that really takes on this task. And the first step is just inventory everything into those three categories, the sources and the uses. And then you need to develop a policy and a plan to achieve those goals. And you probably need a financial advisor to help with that part of it, of how to manage the risk in the portfolio. But one very important step that you led to, Peter, is the governance and the operating model. You need to have those tools and policies in place in order to enable this. And so thinking through what are the decision-making governance that needs to be in place, what is the op model, the people, the process, and the technology that we need to support this.
You know, as you are describing the level of kind of attention and detail work, I would imagine this takes a long time and that there's different versions of this along the way.
You're really never done with this.
Yes.
So this is a living and breathing framework. It's meant to evolve with the family as the family grows and as your, vision and purpose may change. You constantly have to come back to this disciplined approach of thinking through what this looks like for your family at any point in time.
Just a quick comment on that. I'm seeing families that are in their fourth and fifth generation that expand and collapse and then expand again in terms of the complexity of this around governance and around the operating model, depending upon what's coming across the transom.
You're exactly right. And in that middle category, that stability and preservation, that's for the stability and the preservation of the family as well. Mm-hmm. So thinking through, what is inside this framework, what's outside of the framework, and what sort of mechanisms do we need to have to allow people, if they're not aligned with what the vision is, to allow people to exit. So building up reserves for share buyback, for example, and being able to adjust as those needs arise.
So Danielle, as families are moving along in this process, what are some of the guideposts that they need to be following so that they know that they're on the right path?
I think first and foremost, always stay anchored on the vision and purpose of the family. And if that changes, you need to be able to be flexible and agile enough to change with it. And I think also right-size the approach. A lot of times we see families enter into this exercise and they take on too much. So be realistic about what you can achieve and what's important to you and what's inside and what's outside of the framework. Also, take the time up front to get organized. You really do need a good inventory of assets and an understanding of the cash funding needs. And that takes some time. And I think that's an area where a lot of enterprising families may struggle. And also be honest about what it's going to take. So we mentioned governance, op model. This is not a one and done. This is a collective effort. You may insource certain things or outsource certain things, but really be honest about what it's going to take from a governance and an op model perspective. And also you need to make sure you obtain and maintain family alignment around this. So the communication is really critical and education around it so everybody knows what they're a part of. And lastly, I would just say be flexible and agile. It's a living, breathing, framework, and you need to be able to adjust as necessary.
Danielle, it's a very simple framework, but there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving pieces, and it evolves over time. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.